I'm Emilie Lunt, and I believe with my whole heart and soul that our homes are places where we can seek and love the truth, celebrate beauty, and learn good things every single day. That's why I'm educating my kids at home, and I know you can do it too. Welcome to Heart and Soul Homeschool. Well, we're back for round 2 with my husband, Jared Lunt, today. And if you missed the first episode, he introduced himself there, so we won't do all that again. You're welcome to go back and listen to last week's episode if you want to know more about him. But we're going to dive right in because we've been homeschooling for only 3 years now. But there are several things that we realized that even though we came from families that sent us to public school, that our parents really prepared us well to homeschool. Mm-hmm. And so there are a lot of topics now that I would say are kind of buzz words or buzzy topics that everyone talks about in homeschool now. And as I've thought about them, I realized that my parents were doing these things and your parents were doing a lot of these things. They just weren't naming them the way we do now. And so we picked out, I think, 7 or 8 things that our parents did really well that help us on a daily basis as we homeschool our own kids. So we're just going to kind of run through those. Kind of rapid fire here.
Let's do it.
So the first thing that I think our parents did, and I guess I'll say before we really start, we're both very blessed to have families who raised us in the church, and they discipled us very well. We come from very stable families. We've got great extended families. And so in that way, we both feel really blessed and really privileged and honored by that, that we get to be part of families like that. But with that, we wouldn't want anyone who doesn't come from that background to feel discouraged. I think that we hope that this will encourage you that kind of the simple things, none of this is rocket science, really. It's just a lot of consistency and just being there, I think, showing up, that we realize has been of great benefit. And so if you don't come from a family background where these things were done, even though they really bless us, you can bless your own kids with these things. And so we hope this will be an encouragement to you in that way. So having said that, both of our families had a really strong family culture. And I hear that in homeschooling circles a lot. We just got back from a homeschooling conference and several sessions were about this family culture. And so I was even blown away. I thought my family had a strong family culture until I met your family. You guys are very into being Lunts.
You better believe it.
Yeah,
no.
Your last name. Your last name is Lunt, and I never met a family who is so proud to be what they were. And so I kind of tease you about it. But talk a little bit about that because it's a generational bond that you guys have. That's really cool. Starting with your grandpa, really.
And I think part of it's just not a name you hear every day. So that's a little bit of it. It's always kind of stands out as being a little bit different. It's only 4 letters, but no one knows how to spell it. So there's that. But my grandpa had 5 brothers and grew up in rural Illinois. Pretty hard scrabble life, but hardworking. All 5 of the oldest brothers, the 6th brother was younger, but the oldest 5 were all in the military during World War II together, which to give you an idea of their age range.
Yeah, they were really stacked.
Yeah, and probably speaking of public schools, they moved around a lot. They were kind of like the original house flippers. They'd paint a house and then make $100 and move on to the next one, back when $100 would buy you something. So they were kind of like their own little roving band / gang that would move into your public school district and kind of depended on each other to make it work in their new locale. Mm-hmm. So with that, my dad had a lot of cousins with the same last name, and pretty small geographic region and just great people, hardworking, very talented.
Just salt of the earth.
Yeah, very salt of the earth. But I would say multi kind of faceted, like they all had some agricultural tie. Mm-hmm. So even if they weren't necessarily farmers by trade, they were just well-rounded. And, some of them broke horses, some of them, veterinarians, some of them successful corporate people, a mix, but they when they get around each other and they all have just great stories of doing fun things
together. They were together all the time.
Just together and just sitting around listening to all the fun things that they did together just sounded so awesome as a kid.
It's really neat. And even to this day, you guys have a family reunion that's really well attended every single year. And what impressed me was when I came into the family 9 years ago, now the aunts, so your grandpa's brothers, had passed away, but their wives still come to this Lunt family reunion, even though they're in-laws, which
Right.
I just thought was really cool and demonstrated the strong family culture that you had. My family culture was a little bit different, obviously, but my family did a lot of traveling together. We were not super wealthy at all, but my dad always had jobs where he was on the road a lot and not fancy corporate travel. You know, he was driving, he worked for ministry, and so he would drive and visit churches a lot. And so he spent a lot of nights on the road, and we always had a lot of hotel points and some airline points. And so that allowed our family to travel together. And I think that really bonded us together and was a strong part of our family culture that my parents built. We listened to a lot of Adventures in Odyssey when we were on road trips together, which sounds kind of funny. That's a radio program that Focus on the Family puts out. And if you haven't checked that out, I really encourage you to do that because they're really, our kids love them even now. But as funny as that sounds, it built a really strong family culture because we were, you know, caught up in these stories all together. And to this day, you know, we'll still mention those. And then in homeschooling, the term read aloud is really a huge deal. People have made entire careers on encouraging families to do read alouds. And what that is, I mean, if you're in homeschooling, you probably know, but it is literally reading a book aloud. And so as we've become homeschoolers, I realized that my parents did a really good job of reading aloud to us, and that those books created a culture within our family and a point of commonality that we have to this day, that we read these great stories together. And so we have that in common now. And again, that will come up in our conversation even today, that we shared these experiences.
And one thing that I know is Emily's had a hard time getting used to is the culture of showing up. If you're a friend of mine, expect me to just show up. And part of that was we had a family farm, and we'd go up there all the time. It was my favorite place to be. And we'd run into town, and if my grandma and grandpa, we'd always run in and see if they were there. If they weren't there, we'd still drop in, take a bag of Twizzlers or something like that. And it was just kind of develop that if you're close, we stop in and see if you're there. Maybe we stay for 5 minutes. Maybe you're not even there. But to this day, I have friends back home that you make fun of me. You're like, you know, you just walk in their house, whether they're home or not. But it develops relationships, and really, it's an interesting bond with friends and family where you're that close. And
yeah, you're very comfortable to have that relationship.
Very comfortable, but also just it shows that you have the time and you're willing to take the time, that you care. Is really, as I've gotten older, I just did it because I liked it. And now the older I get, the more I realize that it really is certainly something no one expects.
Right. And you're really working hard to instill that in our kids. And that kind of ties into our next one, is that we both, our families, our parents demonstrated to us that they really valued our family when we were growing up, extended family, aunts, uncles. And so if there was something going on, our parents got us there. If there was a family gathering, they made the effort. And both of our families made decisions to kind of stick close to their families. Not that we lived next door, but we lived about 45 minutes away from my grandparents. And so lots of church together, lots of Sunday dinners together, and just kind of the frequency of interaction that makes for those close relationships. And that was a priority for you. Talk about when you were choosing or putting in for your first Army.
Yeah, I originally put in with the 1st Infantry Division to go to Germany, and I was like, oh, this sounds great. And then as I got to thinking about it, like, what was I thinking? Like, what am I going to do in Germany? I don't know anyone in Germany. And so I traded someone for Fort Riley, Kansas, which typically Kansas, when you mention it, I love it, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's
not
on
exciting.
Everyone's destination. I said, well, I was able to maintain those relationships with not only my friends, but my family. And it was,
because it allowed you to go home for a weekend here or there, just kind of be
absolutely
spontaneous.
It was within driving distance to go home for a weekend. And so those were kind of the formative years of my life as an adult, adulting. And even then prioritized being around family, being around home.
Yeah, before you had a family of your own. And that's blessed our family, because I felt similarly. So I was in Washington, D.C. during that time. and knew that I wanted to get married and hopefully have a family, but knew that I wanted my family to be a part of it if I was going to have kids. And so I moved closer to home. I was able to work remotely for the last few years of my job. And so I purposefully moved closer to home with the hopes that if I met someone and started a family, that we would be close by. And so we work really hard. We do a lot of, getting up early, driving to my grandparents for Sunday lunch, that kind of thing, just to show our kids. And we actually had kind of a funny thing happen a few weeks ago. We had gone down to my aunt's house for Mother's Day. And so my daughter got to spend Mother's Day with my grandma, my mom, me, and hopefully she'll be a mom someday. And so on the way home, Jared was telling her that we hoped that, they would bring their kids home to visit grandma and grandpa when we were. And so she thought about it. And like an hour later, she said, I hope you guys aren't disappointed, but I don't feel quite ready to start my own family yet. We kind of laughed and we were glad she said it, so she wasn't worried that we thought at 7 we wanted her to start her own family. But we are being intentional to try to demonstrate the value of our family.
And everyone, we're not here to tell anyone that they're doing it rightly or wrongly, but I've always said to my friends, if you don't visit your parents, don't be surprised when your kids don't visit you.
Yeah. And so that ties into our homeschooling now because we've got this great support system that we're actually close to. And so we're not just getting sort of phone call support. Our parents, like your mom and dad, are watching our kids right now so that we can be here. They drove 3 hours so that they could take our kids to lunch so that you and I could be here together. And we're just very blessed by that. And I think they're blessed by being close to our family and being able to be involved in our kids' education. So the third one is that both of our families very much taught us to live within our means. And this is one that seems super simple, but it's actually, as I become an adult and we've started our family together, I realize it's really uncommon. And so my parents always we had a pretty simple life. It wasn't fancy. We didn't have fancy cars. We didn't have a super fancy house. We didn't always have the latest shoes or, all the things that everybody thought they needed. And my mom and dad were very intentional to teach us why they were doing what they were doing and why they were prioritizing living within our means. I know you had similar upbringing.
Yeah, very much, I would say, lived within or below our means and just instilled in me saving from an early age. And I even remember as a young adult saving for college because I had friends that had kids. It's like, well, what are you saving for? It's like, I don't know. At some point I'll have kids and they'll want to go to college. And they said, well, what if you don't have kids? I said, well, then I'll probably have some nephew or niece or someone. Surely I can help someone out. But, I always had that kind of next generation in mind and understanding that it takes discipline and time. And the earlier you start, the easier it is.
Yeah. And so we try to, because we live within our means, we have seen that gives us a lot of educational opportunities for our kids because we have flexibility. We're not tied to anything. It allows me to stay home and to homeschool our kids. And so we're really thankful for that, that we have this flexibility.
Yeah. And not only that, but there's a lot of situations where when you do the math, one spouse working versus all the costs associated with raising a kid, it maybe isn't a huge net positive. And we've known people, and there's been situations where you just kind of get into the routine of working, and then you have that income, and it just becomes a way of life. And not to say that that's bad. It's just we consciously, before we had kids, realize if we had one thing that we could encourage people is, start thinking about it even before you have kids.
Yeah. And that's not something, we don't want to make anyone feel bad or say that our way is definitely the right way, but it is something that has really blessed us for our parents to have taught us to do that so that we didn't go into our marriage with a ton of debt, so that we were free to make what we think is the best decision for our kids and not be tied to financial decisions that have to be made to kind of pigeonhole us into a decision with education. And so we love that about homeschooling, is just the freedom that it gives us in that way to live within our means. And then also we're not trying to keep up with the Joneses essentially, because our kids don't really know what's cool to wear. So they're still happy with their Walmart t-shirts, you know?
And we've talked about it before, just living below your means, keeping up with the Joneses. Like in our previous episode, we talked about when I looked for a house, the school district. Well, if you're going to homeschool, you may not be hamstrung by the school district as much,
Right.
and you might be able to find a house that works
Yeah,
for
that's
you
in
and
a
your
nice area of
family.
town, but
That's
just
in a-
maybe the school district associated with it isn't what you would
Exactly.
want. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I've heard a lot of people recently in the homeschooling world talking about that, how that, especially in bigger cities, that gives you a lot of options if you're not
Absolutely.
looking for those public school property values. So the other thing that our parents demonstrated well for us that really benefits us in our current situation is that they valued the roles of men and women within our family. And so this is kind of a touchy topic and not everybody likes to talk about it, but we're pretty traditional. And so you are the primary breadwinner in our family, and I am the homemaker and kind of the nurturer, keeping things going on that end. And we love it. It's not like some kind of subservient thing that I am to you. It just works great. And both of our moms, your mom stayed home until you were in school, and then she became a kindergarten teacher. My mom stayed home with us and always had a side hustle. She was a hard worker. She took in sewing and all kinds of things to help support our family, but she was always there. And we both really valued that. And for me, that gave me a vision of what a home could look like and what it would look like for me to be at home with my kids all day. And so that transition hasn't been as hard for me. I know that that's a challenge a lot of times, and I'm not saying that it's never challenging. Sometimes I miss working. I stepped away from a career that I loved, but I think ultimately my mom demonstrating what home looked like has been very beneficial. And then probably for you, your dad was a very consistent, hardworking provider for your family.
Yeah, and there's, our kids don't see us competing, so there's it's very much a supportive role. So for both of us,
we try for
we
it to
support
be, yeah.
each other in different ways, and working is just one thing. Sometimes it works for the time and place, and we just wanted to have that flexibility. Was really where we're at, and so. Going in, we set our lives up to live off one income the best we could, and then hopefully all the other things fall into place.
Yeah. Yeah. So we both come from families, and this looked different again in both of them, but both of our families really value education. And I think not so much like an Ivy League education. I never felt pressured to perform academically, but my parents wanted us to work hard, to do our best. And I think generationally, I think about both of my grandfathers. They are both huge readers. And so my grandpa on my mom's side is a carpenter. He never went to college. My other grandpa was a tradesman as well, and he does have a college degree, but both of them are lifelong learners. They're 85 and 86 now, and they are still learning. They're reading. I just had all of these examples of people who were hungry for knowledge, and if they wanted to learn something, they weren't afraid to learn it. And you kind of had a similar situation.
Yeah, and I remember my dad telling me for high school graduation, I think I got like $20, and I said, "Dad, what's going on here?" And he said, "Well, this is just an expectation. There's no, you don't get an award." But college, he said, we'll maybe look at doing something. And even with college, he said, I expect, college is not an option. You're going to go to college. And with that, your mom and I have the expectation that we will pay for it, up to and including in-state tuition. Anything beyond that is on you. And kind of if you can't get to the career you need to get to with those resources, then the issue is probably you, not the schools themselves. Which I think up until very recently was the way I would have approached our family unit. And fast forward with college, I want to be able to support our kids in a career just as much as I want to support them with a college. College is no longer an expectation unless it is a requirement to get to your desired profession.
Yeah, so I think we grew up probably in the height of the generation where our parents, like some of them had gone to college, some of them hadn't, but college was very much seen as part of the American dream. And everyone, regardless of what you wanted to go into for a career, like I felt like when we were graduating high school, the trades were very much looked down upon. And, if you were going to be successful in life, you needed to go to a 4-year college. And so that's what we did. And my parents have always told my brother and I that our education is our inheritance. And so they saved and worked hard and paid cash for my brother and I's education, which at the time I was appreciative of. But as we've started our own family, I realized just what a gift that was to start life without college loans.
Right.
And so like you said, our kids are still so little. And so we're not speaking of this from a position of authority. But what we're seeing makes us hope that, whether our kids choose to go to college or not, that we'll be able to support them. And it may look more like them starting a business in high school that we can help them with, or lots of options that we couldn't possibly game out now. But I think just that valuing of education and well-rounded education, not necessarily academics,
Right.
Is something that is helping us now as homeschoolers, that our families instilled in us. And kind of along the same lines, my family at least really helped me develop curiosity, and kind of had this, an attitude that life was learning, which again is something that homeschoolers talk about. Life is learning, learning is life. But my parents, even without really probably fully knowing what they were doing and preparing me for, would take us on family vacations. My parents would call the school and find out, what we were going to learn about in history the next year. And so they would make sure on our family road trip that summer that we hit some of those things so that we would have actual, context for what we were learning. We would visit those historical sites, and that helped me so much in my education. And I realize now that that's kind of what we hope to do for our kids also.
And we're probably not doing the job that we should, but I just realize that I'm not a farmer. Don't mistake that I am. But so many lessons I learned are so tied to our family farm. Things that you see in nature, whether it comes to animals, whether it comes to equipment, just lots of things.
Practical
life skills were questions that were asked and answered as a young kid with my dad or my grandpa at the farm. Even just kind of social interactions with other farmers that would come over, or you'd swing by and you'd see someone. Part of that kind of that not knowing a stranger was just developed on, well, who's this guy coming up on the tractor? Well, I don't know, but he's probably nice. We'll say hi.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of things that being outside and we've tried to provide with our kids that experience. And I remember talking to the guy that trimmed our trees.
Yeah.
He said his son was helping him run the wood chipper.
He was like 13 years old.
Yeah,
I think.
13. And he said, well, we homeschool. He said, I figured it was probably pretty hard to teach him how to work hard while he was sitting inside in the air conditioning for 8 hours a day. So he comes and helps me 8 hours a day and then homeschools in the evening.
Yeah, and this kid was loving it. That was probably one of the things that really encouraged us, because we were still deciding what to do with our kids' education.
Right.
And that really made an impression on us, because this kid was such a polite young man. He was such a hard worker, very competent. We were like, wow.
And the reality is, like where my dad would have grown up in a small farming community, the opportunities in a metro area for a kid to have any sort of meaningful hard work are pretty limited.
Yeah, just
you have to create them for yourself, but there would have been no shortage of chores for my dad to do as a little kid.
Just
at
being
the farm.
outside, enjoying, learning all of those practical life skills. That kind of ties into another thing that our parents really demonstrated to us is they both sets of our parents, I should say, were very intentional about investing in relationships with people who had very diverse experience, diverse ages. We always had a lot of friends who were older, in their 80s. And my mom and dad really valued those relationships, and we try to do that with our kids. And I think that's a gift of homeschooling, is that we have time to do that. So we try to focus more on just diverse relationships in the truest meaning of the word, rather than focusing on their peer-to-peer relationships a lot of times, which makes our life really rich, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And with our kids, just taking them to those different things, I always joke kind of the biggest difference from the day-to-day with a white-collar job is being at the racetrack, and you see a lot of cigarettes being smoked, a lot of grease under the fingernails, and these guys work hard. And you find out they work really hard, and then they play really hard at the racetrack, and just the nicest people.
We'll tell everybody Jared's a go-karter. And so when he says the racetrack, it's the go-kart racetrack. And so you're out there. But no, our kids love to go out there with you, and it's a really fun environment, because it's people that we wouldn't come into contact with through your work, or I guess we could through church. But
and it kind of plays into that mindset of real people doing real things. They're not playing racing video games. They're out there doing it.
Yeah, in the fresh air and sunshine, and there are a lot of families that do it together. And so it's a really fun environment for all of us that we enjoy, and just something different. And so we have time to invest in that, because because we homeschool.
Yeah.
And our parents demonstrated that very well.
Yeah. And actually you find in a lot of these organizations, they love young people. Like a lot of these people don't have hobbies like they used to. So if there's something that you like, that you're interested in, whether it's classic cars, classic tractors, trains.
Yeah. We find people are really willing to show our kids what they're doing, show them their hobbies, kind of invite them in.
The miniature train line in Kansas City. I mean, I'm sure they would love to have younger volunteers helping work on these trains. So,
so being comfortable, our parents making us comfortable operating in different circumstances, not just only with our peers, has really broadened our idea of what socialization looks like as we homeschool. And we're really, really thankful for that. So the last one is, I think both of our parents made sacrifices to do what was best for us. And so it kind of ties into living within their means. But our parents, we never had fancy lives like we said before, but we had really good lives, and our parents were really intentional to do things that would be good for us and not be beholden to anyone else over it. What did that look like in your family?
Well, I know there were opportunities that my dad passed up for work where he looked at it either distance or the town itself and just said, the job's not worth it to uproot my family. So it might have been more of money
or, a better career move.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just said, that's probably not what we need to do as a family. And part of that, we had the farm, we had grandparents there, and just you get to the point where, these are your people and you start weighing out, what is most important. And so I feel really happy that my parents did that, and I know they made sacrifices. Some of them I probably don't even know about. That helped us stay there, have roots, and I just think as we get older and our society changes, I'm so thankful for the roots that I have. I would say my hometown for one, but just the Midwest. At large. I told my boss, I said, I'm just a Midwestern guy, and it's the only place I feel comfortable selling because this is what I'm used to, and I relate and I enjoy it. So kind of putting people where they thrive is, I think, a lesson that my parents taught me. Anyways.
And watching our parents make those decisions has helped us, I think, process when we've been faced with kind of the forks in the path, which way to go. I think having watched our parents make those decisions and have priorities that were focused on the right things instead of just money or just career paths, that kind of thing has benefited us really tremendously.
And I remember when I was getting out of the Army, I got to go to southwestern Washington, which you've never been there. It's absolutely beautiful. I had a friend who is the sheriff, and he also owned a big winery. And he said, well, you can come work for the winery. You can be a deputy sheriff. As a 27, 28-year-old guy, that seemed awesome. And in the back of my mind, I just couldn't shake the fact that I'd have to get on a plane every time I wanted to see someone I was related to. And because of that, there's no way it was ever going to work.
Right.
So
just kind of being comfortable in your own skin and being willing to step away from opportunities that might come your way.
Right.
That might take you away from your roots and the things that you really value. Yeah, I think that's encouraging. Well, I hope that this has been encouraging to you guys, just as we talk about some of the things that our parents did intentionally, but probably could never have imagined the impact that they would have had on our lives. And, we're striving to do these things well ourselves. We hope that maybe this has given you ideas or just helped you know that the small things sometimes add up to being the big things and the life decisions that lead to the really good and stable life that we all want to have for our kids as we raise them and as we homeschool them. So thanks for being here again.
Yeah, I think we owe it to the audience and 30, 40 years to let them know if our kids come and visit us.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We've kind of made it a big deal. High. Yeah, we really do hope that our kids come visit us and that we've been good examples in that. So we'll let you know if we get to see the grandkids in 30 or 40 years. So no, thanks for being here this week, and I hope you'll join me next time for the next episode of Heart and Soul Homeschool.
Heart and Soul Homeschool is a podcast presentation of the Herzog Foundation. The views and opinions expressed on the show are those of the host and guests and not necessarily the views of the Herzog Foundation. Be sure to like and subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode of Heart and Soul Homeschool.